We want to turn to the issue of the
Fantastic
debt
segue.
ceiling debates here in the United States, and we are very happy to be joined by Walter Smolarek, editor of Liberation News, author of a recent article, I forgot to have my tab up, but a great recent article about the debt ceiling debate on Liberation News. Walter, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, I
I
just
think
want
I
to
know
start.
the title.
What's that? Please.
I think I know the title. Is it Will Biden Reward Right-Wing Blackmail and Debt Ceiling Talks? Question
That's
mark.
it.
That's the title. That's it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
There you go. It's a good title. It was worth intervening there. Go ahead, Eugene.
No, it is. Well, Walter, I always hate to assume that people know everything. So let's just maybe start here. What is the debt ceiling and why are we talking about it?
Sure. So the debt ceiling is a completely manufactured fake crisis. In 1917, there was a bill passed that limited the amount of money that the U.S. federal government is allowed to borrow. Periodically, generally every year or two, it's raised. For many, many decades, this was something that people didn't really even think about. It was just a matter of course. Every couple of years, Congress is going to pass an increase in the debt ceiling limit, right? This has happened scores of times. But what's taken place since essentially since the Tea Party wave in 2010 is that right-wing politicians periodically decide to use the expiration of the debt limit, right? The need to pass legislation to raise the debt limit as political leverage to force massive social spending cuts. That's really what's at the core of this, trying to get rid of what little social safety net exists, shred those programs that are on the books by depriving them of funding, and to essentially, hold a gun to the head of the economy, quote unquote, by saying, well, look, the U.S. will make the U.S. federal government default on its debt, which would have cascading economic problems, unless these attacks are carried through against working people.
And then that brings us to the issue of the role of Democrats here, because oftentimes, and I mean, since the Obama days, even when the Republicans started to very strategically use this issue to get their way and to hold the government hostage, since the Obama days, Democrats have often tried to portray themselves as the defenders of the working class, we're here to make sure that Republicans don't get what they want. And that's what Biden is doing right now, right? He's promoting himself as the opposition to these big bad Republicans, which, okay, great. But is that really true, Walter?
No, it's completely false. I mean, Joe Biden has been on the sides of the big banks and corporations and billionaires his entire career. That hasn't changed since he's taken office. I mean, Biden's also done his part to shred the social safety net. There was an expansion. I mean, ironically, it happened under Trump. There was an expansion of social programs because of the pandemic. Over the course of 2020, it became easier to get access to food stamps, to be enrolled in Medicaid and stay enrolled in Medicaid. There was a nationwide moratorium on evictions. I mean, Biden has presided over the shredding of all of that. Those could all have become permanent programs. They were very, very popular, and it would have made Biden very popular too. But he doesn't. He didn't do it. He doesn't want to do it. And so this posture is I'm the only thing standing between the devastation that the Republicans will wreak on working families and the alternative. He's not the alternative. He's taking part in this too. It also seems that he could offer concessions, right? The Republicans have passed this legislation in the House that would impose gigantic across the board budget cuts. There's a lot of complicated internal dynamics within the Republican Party, but there's certainly a scenario where we could see Biden agreeing to some parts of that plan in exchange for votes to raise the debt ceiling. So the fact that he's agreed to now begin negotiations with Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell and other leaders of the Senate and the House is an indication that he's open to something like that. Now Biden is saying, okay, well, look, these talks, they're not about the debt ceiling. They're just about the federal budget, which we've got to pass next year anyway. So I'm not rewarding their blackmail. I'm not rewarding their hostage taking. I'm just having a conversation about the federal budget and potential deficit reduction measures. That's purely semantics. That has no actual substantive difference because what the Republicans are seeking is reductions in the budgets allocated to social programs. So they're just using semantics to try to get away from the fact that they're actually perfectly willing to sit down with Republicans and hammer out how they're going to screw over working people.
Yeah, I mean, it really quite the situation, and well, this is I don't know a number of things I want to say, but maybe this is the most important one. When we were talking about the issue, or have been continually talking about the issue of the filibuster, since the Biden administration has come in, one of the things that people have pointed out is if we really wanted to fight, there are various novel theories that are out there that you could put on the table. Is that the same thing here with the debt ceiling, and what attitude has Biden taken towards, if there are any particular sort of maneuvers or workarounds that he could try? Because of course the way it's presented in the media is sort of like, well, there's no alternative. Republicans control the House, Democrats control the Senate, so like what are you going to do? They have to negotiate, as if there's no sort of forward position that Biden could take.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most prominent example of that is a clause of the 14th Amendment, which was one of the amendments passed in the aftermath of the Civil War. So there's a language in the 14th Amendment that essentially says, even though it was passed in a different time period, maybe a different context, the language is totally clear. Like the U.S. government shall pay its debt, right? Like there is like a constitutional mandate for the U.S. government to pay back the loans that it takes out, to make payments on its debt. So what Biden could say is like, okay, well, look, if you're going to say to the country, like, carry out these dramatically unpopular social spending cuts, or we're going to tank the economy, we're going to make the U.S. government default on its debt and maybe tip the world economy into recession. He could say like, well, I'm just gonna let's fight it out in court. I'm going to just pay the debt. I'm just going to keep doing it because the Constitution says that I have to. And if you want to take me to court and try to get the Supreme Court to essentially impose a default on the U.S. government, like, be my guest. If you want to commit political suicide like that, be my guest. That would be a strong fighting orientation that I think would actually galvanize a lot of public support behind him. But he is not going to do it. He raised the possibility of the 14th Amendment. There's, I think, divided opinion within the administration, but it's not the kind of fighting offensive posture that would actually stand a chance at beating back the Republicans.
Walter, when we talk about the cuts that Republicans want, I'm sure we're talking about like what, maybe cuts to like the massive military industry, or perhaps I'm sure they're asking for cuts to the things we really spend money on, like that massive border apparatus that we have. Okay, I'll stop before everybody starts thinking I'm not joking. But no, I raise all that to say, what are the cuts that are on the table? You said unpopular cuts to spending programs that are like actually help people. What are we talking about here? What's at risk?
Yeah, well, that's a good point about what's being exempted, right? Because it would be 18% caps on or a cap on spending that, because of inflation, would actually effectively be an 18% cut to like every government department. But subsequently, different Republican leaders have come out and said, "Oh no, not the military. No, not the Department of Homeland Security. They do things that we like. They brutalize immigrants." And so if you do exempt those, plus the Department of Veterans Affairs, to meet these, the spending cap, right, they would have to essentially cut the budget of all other departments in half. So this would be huge. It would be dramatic. It would also include imposing, quote unquote, work requirements on food stamps and on Medicaid, which it really just means like a whole lot of confusing bureaucracy that's designed to screw people out of the benefits that they are actually legally entitled to by making it really confusing to get it. And they also want to reverse the student loan forgiveness policy that the administration rolled out, which is also being challenged in the Supreme Court. So terrible, unpopular things. It's really remarkable that Biden is not taking more of a fighting orientation around this.
It really is remarkable, and the other remarkable thing here is that Kevin McCarthy was able to pass this one bill, but of course as the negotiations go on, significant elements, and you've already referenced this to some degree, Walter, in the Republican caucus actually think that cutting every department by half is not enough, and that in fact more should be done. So it seems very likely in a way that if Biden is to negotiate here, the end point will end up actually even worse probably than what McCarthy has actually proposed, because as you know, I've seen some of these Republicans say this is our only chance to impose anything. And so it seems like even though they were willing to give him some votes for this kind of cosmetic thing, when we really get down to the nitty-gritty, it could actually be worse than that.
Yeah. And I mean, if we step back for a second and look at this from the point of view of like, the breakdown of the basic state institutions in the United States, like the functioning of, the government apparatus of this, most powerful capitalist empire in the world, like it is absurd that this is how it works. Like, this is how the US government pays its debts, right? There's like these near misses every few years, because essentially a very small handful of ultra right-wing politicians have so much leverage. I mean, that's not the only reason. Of course, the bulk of the political elite would like to do a lot of these things. But in this particular situation, yeah, it's certainly true that because the Republican majority in the House is so narrow, the most unbelievably extreme right-wing people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the guy in Florida, the congressman from Florida, who's Matt Gaetz.
Yeah.
They have all of this all of this influence because they're, essentially, if they can keep their little block of a handful of far right wingers together, they're like the kingmakers. And so Kevin McCarthy is not just, negotiating with Biden, seeing what he can get Biden to agree to. He's also has to keep in mind, like, okay, what can I actually keep these people on side for? So it's really, kind of a systemic or structural paralysis that they find themselves in.
No, for sure.
I have one question before we wrap up here, for Walter, and that is, and this might be a tough one, because I think sometimes when it comes to this issue, which comes up every, however many years, we see the issue of debt ceiling. A lot of Americans, your eyes kind of glaze over because what does that mean? And it's a lot of technical language. And it feels like one of those issues where like we have no power because there's these two, like parties that pretend they're at odds but aren't really, and like they're the ones deciding in these closed door meetings and these negotiations. What can we do? Like, is there anything we can do as this sort of thing takes place to, push back against the attempt to cut these very important programs that people depend on for like their survival?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the overall answer to that is like build an independent fighting force that can actually represent the interests of working people. Because as long as Biden is the best that we have, the Democrats are the best that we have, like it's not going to work out well, right? Because they're not actually on our side. At the end of the day, they're on the side of the Wall Street donors, the corporate executives that bankroll their campaigns, that go to the same country clubs that they do, that send their kids to the same private schools. There actually has to be an independent fighting force that would change the calculations. It certainly can seem like this. The outcome of the debt ceiling debate is just going to be determined by calculations made by powerful politicians, and we're not part of their calculations. But independent organization, grassroots fighting movements, that can really change the calculus.
Mm-hmm. Walter Smolarek, editor of Liberation News, also author of a excellent recent article on the debt ceiling. As always, really appreciate you joining us here on The Freedom Side.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Mm-hmm.